Welcome to the Hardcore MBA podcast with your host, Erland Bakke. Would you like to have a free copy of the #1 international best-selling book, Never Work Again? All you have to do is rate, review, and subscribe to Hardcore MBA podcast on iTunes and email us a screenshot of your review to erland@mroutsource.com.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Hardcore MBA, the Millionaire Business Academy. Signing in from London, central London, where I live and also work. A couple of weeks ago, I met a very interesting person at a seminar. And yes, I do go to seminars. I am constantly learning, training, and hanging around my peers. So today we have Jeremy Smith. Now he has worked in the UK, but he's also worked all over Scandinavia. And he's primarily focused on sales training and also outsource benchmarking. He's been an entrepreneur for more than 20 years, and he's got a third very exciting company that he's working on as well. So the thing is, when I need answers, when I'm really curious about how something works in a country or an industry, if it's about health, if it's about brain, if it's about stress, if it's about business, marketing, LinkedIn maybe, then what do? Well, I go to an expert and I ask them to be a guest on the show. I ask them the questions that I have about that discipline, and then I share it with you because I believe that the questions that I'm asking myself are probably relevant to you also. Jeremy, welcome to the call.
Thanks very much. Good to be speaking with you, Erland.
You too. So you've actually written one book, and you are currently writing your next book. Why are you writing your second book?
So the second book that I'm writing is focused on or supporting my sales training business, and this is I guess my real passion, which is focused on helping people who are not salespeople become confident and proficient in the sales. So what we're doing is we're helping startups and SMEs where the business owner might be an expert, someone who's really good at what they do, knows what they do, is passionate about it, and loves doing it, but doesn't really have any background in sales. And by implementing a few simple processes that are tried and tested by sales professionals, they can drastically change the number of clients they have, revenues the company's building, and just provide them with more confidence when they're going through those sales processes. And that's what the book's focused on, and it's supporting that training business.
One of the things that we talked about was the difference of sales based on countries. So first of all, there's probably sales principles that work like a foundation of sales strategies that work many places. Can you cover those first, and then we'll get more into like what to think about selling in the UK. So what would you say are the core things to think about when it comes to sales on a sort of universal level?
On a universal level, the thing that you've got to do is match your service, and we're talking predominantly here. I mean, my background is in professional services sales, and I'm focusing very much on professional services organizations here. And what you have to do is you need to match your services to the needs of your client. It really is as simple as that. Now, the trick is finding out what their real needs are, making sure that they have a need your services can satisfy, and then finding a way to differentiate your services. So when they're looking at other organizations who might provide a similar service, there's a reason for them to buy your service rather than somebody else. So what you're looking to do is to tease out what their real issues are, make sure they've got a need that matches your services, and then differentiate your services such that they see the benefits of having you working for them.
And why do we get confused? Because I mean, what you described right now is a very simple process, yet most entrepreneurs and small companies remain small because they're not very good at sales and marketing. What happens in that process?
Well, the easiest pitfall is to start talking about what you do and why they should be buying you. Because you feel passionate about what you do, you're really good at it, then for sure you'll like talking about it. And typically prospects want to know what you can do, why you're good at it, why they should be using you. And the biggest mistake to make is to start talking about that early on. You need to find out what it is that the client actually needs from you, what they really want, and then put what you do in context of what's important to them. If you start talking too early, then you're going to miss out on understanding what their real needs are. And you'll end up talking for longer than you really need to about what it is that you do. And you'll also put yourself in a position where you'll have given them all of the ammunition they may need to tell you why they don't need you. If at the beginning of the process you tease out from them what they do need, what they've tried before, what would work for them, what wouldn't work for them, all of these things, then when you put what you do in context for them, there's no way for them to tell you that they don't need you and why they can't use you, because you've already teased those things out early on and put what you do in an appropriate context.
So we need to be good listeners, and it's about what they want, not what we want.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, we need to be good listeners, and we need to ask the right questions so that we can find out the answers that we can then use to frame our services.
So why is it instinctive amongst people to go out and talk about them, and because you hang out in enough entrepreneur circles, especially with the sort of white belt, yellow belt entrepreneurs, it's all about their agenda, what they want, what they're doing. I recently went to Oslo Innovation Week, which was really interesting. It's a week full of
seminars. I'm losing you.
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
I'm not 100% sure what's going on with my internets today, but I'm going to be closing down all my tabs, which is always a good idea to do before a podcast interview. So yeah, I went to Oslo Innovation Week this week, and it was really interesting. One of the things that I noticed was, like, when I was speaking to very young entrepreneurs, sort of not young as in age, but like people that haven't been in business with their own company for a while, they were so about themselves. They were only talking about themselves. And I remember that for myself as well when I was starting out, that I was so focused on my agenda and my product, and I didn't understand why people didn't want it. And all those things. So why is that such a primary focus for young entrepreneurs?
I think it's just probably because they're really excited about what they're doing. And this is kind of the raison d'etre for my business, which is it's fine. It's absolutely, it's perfect. People want you to be passionate about what you do. Otherwise, why would they buy you? However, if you're talking about what you do and your reason for being, and not paying attention to what's important to them, they're going to, and firstly, they're going to lose interest. Most people want to be heard. And if you're talking to someone about your business and you're hoping to sell, then you need to be focused on what's important to them and why they would buy from you. You've got to get these things out on the table first. Otherwise, you're going to lose their attention.
So in terms of selling in different countries, so basically I just moved from New York to London, and I also do business in Norway, but I actually sell all over the world, which is interesting. So like I do webinars, I will offer, a membership website type, maybe some coaching. I don't offer so much coaching anymore. But anyway, I do webinars where there's a global audience. So I have people signing in from New Zealand, Australia, everywhere in the world. Have clients all over the world as well. And it's interesting how how do you sell on an international basis? And also when you're doing a webinar, when you can't actually listen to people, what would a good strategy be there?
Okay. With regard to the webinar where you can't actually listen to people, the best approach there is to take some kind of survey, if you can, of why people or what the issues are that people are dealing with that your service is supporting or helping, so that you can frame what you do in an appropriate manner. It's all very well talking about the benefits of your services in isolation. However, if you can get some information in terms of why people are using you or why people are saying that they would use you, then you can put scenarios together that make sense to people, that they can recognize, that resonate for them, and frame your service around those. So if you don't actually have the ability to talk to individuals on a one-to-one basis about this kind of thing, and it's the same for if you're talking at a conference, then using examples that people can relate to, and then explaining what you did in that situation and what the benefits to the client were, that's probably the best approach in that sort of situation.
So in terms of the UK, so in Norway, you can typically just call somebody up and you can get direct access to the person you need to speak to, and you can pitch them directly. And the way you do it is quite direct. You don't really need to, there's not that many gatekeepers. So in the UK, I haven't really done sales here actively since 2007. But I remember there being a lot more gatekeepers. It's also a very different way of selling. As well as my friends, they say, sometimes I just get a funny look from them when I'm just being myself, and it's typically because I've done something that isn't in line with British culture. So probably when I do sales, I'll probably make the same blunders. So what's important to think about in terms of selling in the UK?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. You're absolutely right with regard to the gatekeepers, and it's becoming more and more difficult. There is a theory that cold calling is a dying art, or gets less results than it used to, because people are wise to all of the tricks they use. However, we still have a reasonable level of success. I think the trick here is you need to qualify who it is that you're calling, or that you're trying to get to. You need to warm them up a little bit more than you used to, by getting relevant information to them, and then having a reason to talk to them. So you may need to do a bit more research into the individual, the organization, so on and so forth. So when you get to the gatekeeper, it's not just a case of, can I speak with so-and-so? It's, can I speak with so-and-so because, and then you've got a really good reason. Then the gatekeeper is more likely to go and talk to the individual, and ask them if you can have some of their time, or if there's a reason for them to have, for you to have some of their time. And if they've already seen something from you and they recognize your name, your company, and potentially you've already expounded some of the benefits of what you do, you've got a higher probability of actually getting to talk to them. And you're absolutely right in terms of the profile of different countries. The UK is far more difficult to get to the people that you're going to want to sell to, than it ever has been before. Whereas in the Nordics, where we also work.
This podcast is brought to you by MrOutsource.com. Outsourcing to the Philippines done for you.
I'm not saying people just seem to be nicer. They're easier to do business with than in the UK. And I think some of that's because in the UK, to a degree, we've become cynical, and people are approached so frequently with new products by salespeople, by telemarketing, even in their home lives, that it's becoming more difficult to get to these people without doing more work initially.
So I guess the ideal business would actually have people looking them up. So technically, being oversubscribed would be a great way to run a business. I don't think I've ever had a business that has been sort of oversubscribed or managed to put that in place. I mean, I'm a big fan of Dr. Cialdini's book Influence, and it's interesting that you said, when you want to reach a certain person and get through the gatekeeper, you should say, "May I speak to Mr. Bob because I am this person." And using the because, it makes it like it's like a human trigger that, oh, there's a reason for it. Okay, well then I need to go check. And that's one of the tips in that book, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So,
Cialdini is a great writer. It's one of my favorite books, actually. I've just a huge coincidence. I have it sitting on my desk next to me.
I have it. I actually have it on my iPad, and it's one of those books that I also have it on my vision board. It sounds maybe a little bit strange to have on your vision board, but I on my Mac I've got like a folder with it's called the Daily Magic, and it's all the sort of things that I want to think about, and also I'm working towards. So every day, if my laptop stands still for 2 minutes, these images pop up, and the 7 principles of influence pop up as well, because I think it's important to keep in mind. It's funny, it's so easy to look at a framework, but I think embodying something is a totally different thing. So I would say embodying is when you do something without thinking about it, while you're in training, you're sort of still trying to implement and think about. It's like when you play tennis and you learn a new grip, and you're constantly thinking about the grip, then you haven't embodied it yet. And I'm still working on embodying the sort of seven influential factors of Dr. Cialdini, actually. How do you go from sort of knowing something intellectually in sales to embodying it?
I think that's very similar to everything else in life. It's about using it and using it and using it until you're just doing it subconsciously. It's, as you say, it's tennis grip, golf grip, driving a car. It's unconscious competence. It's getting from the point where you have to think about doing it to just doing it because it's something you do all the time. And there's no substitute for practice.
So how do you actually work with your clients in terms of like the startups and SMEs? How do you actually work with them on improving their skills?
Okay, so I was with a new client just yesterday, so I'll take you through the process that we're employing. So the first thing that we do is we have a discovery session, which is a 2-hour session where we go through exactly what they're doing at the moment to try and gain clients. So we talk about what their current sales and marketing process is, if anything, what are they doing, where are their clients coming from, what's the profile of their clients, who or what is their competition, what works for them, what doesn't work for them. And that's quite an interesting one, because quite often you find that people will implement some kind of process, and it could even be subconsciously. Say, for example, they're going to exhibitions to try and gain new clients, and they'll keep doing it because they think it's the right thing to do, but without any real plan or process behind it. And they'll get clients through other sources, maybe word of mouth. But they'll keep going to the exhibitions, doing what they're doing because they think it's the right thing to do. And by just tweaking a few things in that process when they're at the exhibition, it can have massive change. It can affect massive changes to the number of clients that they have. That's kind of a digression, I guess. We talk about win rate. We do a SWOT analysis. Got to do one of those. We do win-loss analysis. We talk about USPs, unique sales proposition. We talk about the value of those USPs to their clients. We talk about pipeline management and closing technique. Just really to find out what it is that they're doing, so that then the next phase, which is a half-day workshop, can be focused on the areas that are going to drive the most significant impact for them, with the least amount of effort. Because bearing in mind that these are people whose core business is not selling, it is doing what it is that they're passionate about doing. So what we want to do for that half-day workshop is really help them implement some simple processes, change as few things as possible, such that they have a simple procedure or framework that they can use with confidence, that doesn't make them look or sound salesy, but drives far better results for them.
Do you use video at all to like film them when they're pitching?
We have done, yeah, absolutely. It depends on the individual that we're working with, as to what it is that we need to bring out. So there's no set formula for that second workshop, or indeed subsequent workshops where we go into more detail in individual areas. And yes, sometimes video is very useful to bring out points that are important for people to understand in terms of what they're doing and how they're doing it.
And what about the embodiment? How do you like go through it with them again and again and again, or do you kind of like build a framework and then let them do it? How does that work?
Yeah, so there is a relatively standard framework that we use, or that I say standard, that we've created, that we use across the board pretty much with all professional services organizations we're working with, because it's simple and it works. And what we do is we repeat and we repeat, and we do the dreaded role playing several times with different examples to get them used to using the framework and asking the questions they need to ask. When they go away from that first workshop, it will feel awkward for them. It just will, because they're not used to doing it. But after they've done it half a dozen times, they'll feel better with it. We have follow-up workshops that most of our clients then take us up on, because they realize that they need more practice and they need it to polish what they're doing. And over time, it becomes part of what they do on a regular basis. And again, there's no substitute for practice.
So how do you, because a big part of sales and marketing is failure and rejection. So how do you train people in those two beautiful parts of life?
So failure and rejection, yes, it's an interesting one. It's something you've just got to get used to. You can't win every deal, and what we suggest to people is that they keep a record of their wins and losses. When you lose something, you can look at it as a positive, because if you can find the reason you didn't win, then you can use that information next time you're out there talking to someone. Most of the time, you can turn that loss to useful information. You can utilize it as part of your process. If you win all of the time for a period of time, then it's easy to get complacent. So I wouldn't say it's good to lose or that it's important to lose, but when you do lose, it can provide you with some real insights that you can then apply positively going forward.
I actually reframed it for myself, where failure is not taking action. So, for instance, if it's something that I'm scared of doing, but I actually really want to do or I need to do, um, and, and I don't take action, then that's failure. And then I don't really view sort of not getting a contract as failure. It's more like as you said, a learning experience. And it's funny because like the more you fail, the more successful you'll be. Because like if you're constantly failing and learning, then your skill set, your learning dramatically increases. So I'd say like in the 8 years I've been an entrepreneur, I've learned so much. Like I learn so much every single day, and I couldn't have done it any other way. I couldn't have done it. I have to be out there trying and doing, and failing and getting rejected to figure things out. And I can't remember who said it, but like you can only be as successful as your failures, and I truly believe that. So. If you're out there and you don't feel like things are going your way, then just reframe yourself as Jeremy says, and learn something from it, and then turn it into a win. Thanks for sharing that.
Sure. That is actually, there's an interesting symmetry there with unique sales propositions as well, where as part of the SWOT analysis that we do, we look at weaknesses in the organization. Often you can turn those weaknesses into a unique sales proposition. So, for example, if you're a very small, let's say, accounting firm, where you don't have an army of accountants with processes in place to support clients, then that can be turned into a USP by virtue of the fact that you're small, you're flexible, you're agile, so on and so forth. So you're right, you can turn a loss into a learning experience, you can turn a weakness into a USP. So anything that people think is potentially a negative can be turned into positive if you just put the right spin on it.
Let's talk about some of the blunders that we can do in the UK. So let's talk about the sort of after work drinks. So what I've heard is that in the UK, the sort of negotiations are very sort of you kind of walk. You don't really say something directly, but you kind of insinuate something, and then the deal isn't actually closed in the meeting room. It's often closed at the pub or at dinner. Or so how does that whole process work in the UK?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the culture has shifted over the last probably 10, maybe more years. It certainly used to be a culture where big deals were done on the golf course, in the pub, at the restaurant, so on and so forth. And yeah, for any number of reasons, that culture has shifted to become far more professional. A lot of large organizations are involving their procurement organization more. So those deals that were done outside of the office are not as frequent as they used. It's interesting, if you look at the procurement community, it used to be called purchasing, which back in the day was an organization that was pretty much there to do the T's and C's and do the paperwork for the business, where the business had already made a decision. But the procurement fraternity, as it now is, has become much more professional, has a much higher profile in most large organizations, and even many smaller ones. And they have procedures and processes in place to make sure that appropriate processes are followed So deals are done that are right for the business, not necessarily deals that are done at a sports event, over dinner, and so on and so forth. They do still happen, but not nearly as frequently as they used to.
What about sort of direct selling? So let's say I'm on stage and I'm, offering, outsourcing and all this stuff.
This podcast is brought to you by MrOutsource.com. Outsourcing to the Philippines done for you.
A way of selling in the US it won't necessarily work here. And I've actually noticed that like the stuff that I know works in the US doesn't really work in the UK. No. As well, because I can see by the sales numbers, right? The percentage of sales, like 100 people in the audience, X amount of people will buy in the US, and then the number's different in the UK when I do the exact same presentation. And it is, pretty direct, pretty straightforward, stacking the sale. Why doesn't that work?
I think again it comes down to the sort of the cynicism and the reserved nature of the UK market. It's a lot more difficult to get people in the UK excited about something than it is in the US. Even more so, we do a lot of business in the Nordics. Finland is a country where it's very difficult to get people excited. More traditional sales processes seem to work really well there, where you take them through a framework, a much more considered manner. I think it's just building excitement is different or delivers different results in different countries. Making sure people understand the benefits of what you're doing works better, or in my experience over here, than trying to get people excited.
And so what would you do? So you would educate people, like make them excited about some kind of benefit, and then you would educate them as to how they can make that happen in a more subtle way, intelligent way.
I think that's probably the most appropriate approach. Yeah, absolutely. It is more about the education and ensuring they get the value, the benefits. It's a generally a slower process here than in the States, and I think your experience is probably echoed by many organizations that sell in both of those geographies.
What about humor? Brits are famous for your humor and wit. To what extent do you have to be witty in a presentation?
It always helps if you can get people laughing and get them on side. It's a wonderful thing. I would just caution: you've got to know that it's appropriate humor and people will understand it and it will make them laugh. The worst thing you can do is get up there, try and be funny, and it falls flat. You need to have that gift if you're going to do it. Otherwise, you're much safer sticking to a pitch which is appropriate, follows the right process, builds the benefits, so on and so forth. Yes, humor is a great thing, but you really need to know how to use it.
So let's talk about outsourcing. I mean, you've been working in the outsourcing industry for a while. What do you actually do in that space?
Okay, so the other business which supports clients who outsource is in the IT space. So it's supporting IT outsourcing clients, and it's a benchmark service. So we have information on contracts from hundreds of companies we have been in and assessed over the years. And what we're able to do is take a client's existing outsourcing contract, compare it to other contracts we have on our database where the clients are receiving similarly complex services, and tell the client if they're getting value for money or not, where they're doing well, where there might be opportunities to improve. Now, typically in an outsourcing contract, there's a clause that says every couple of years you can undertake an external assessment. benchmark to see whether you're getting value for money or not. And the reason for that is 2 years into an outsourcing contract, quite often, more often than not, the shape of the service being delivered to the client is different from that which was originally contracted. So even if you've been through a professional selection process in the first place, the service you're getting 2 years down the line may well no longer be competitive. So this external benchmarking, this assessment will tell you if compared to current market values, you're getting good value for money or not. And it's interesting because that market itself is shifting a little bit. That used to be the bulk of the work that we did in terms of assessing outsourcing contracts. What's happening now a lot of the time is people are coming up to the end of an existing contract or for a break clause in their contract, and that generally they may be happy with the current service provider. They don't want to go through a tender process. They don't want to go through a painful transition process along which has associated risks and costs, etc. What they want to do is make sure that the existing provider is delivering value for money. So they'll go through one of these benchmarking exercises to assess whether they are getting value for money or not, and it provides them independent, objective information as part of their negotiation.
So what size companies are we talking about here, like revenue-wise? How many people would they have in the UK?
So in the UK, the size of the organisations, we're working with FTSE 100 and FTSE 250 companies. In the Nordics, we're working with typically the largest 50 companies in each of the Nordic countries. Right.
So fairly large organisations.
Yeah, and the reason for that is they need to be spending quite a lot of money on IT for them to get an ROI on our service. If you're spending, for example, £1 million on an outsourcing contract, then it's going to be difficult to get the level of reduction out of that you would need to get an ROI on our fees. If you're spending 10 million, 50, it's much easier.
So how do you actually assess whether an outsourcing IT company is good? What are the criteria?
Okay, so the criteria that we've got, the axes we look at the scope of the service that's being delivered. We look at the volumes that they're supporting. We look at the complexity of the service they're supporting. We look at the service levels and the quality that they're delivering. And we compare on all of those axes. Now, generally speaking, the things that people are really interested in no particular order, are, is it cost competitive? Could they get it cheaper elsewhere for the same service? Is their service excessively complex? Could it be simplified? And one thing that you often see in these contracts is when they're originally negotiated, there are all kinds of promises made in terms of the transition that will be implemented and the new service that will be delivered, the simplicity that will be introduced, the complexity that will be removed, so on and so forth. And 2 years into the contract, the team that sold the deal in the first place has disappeared. You now have a delivery organization, delivery team, an account management team. The account management team is managing a P&L. They've got to buy services internally for the organization and make a profit. And a lot of those promises are much more difficult to meet than it first seemed when the deal was signed. So what a lot of our clients want us to help them understand is whether the service they're receiving today is value for money, given the level of complexity they've got, which is sometimes higher than they were hoping it would be 2 or 3 years into the service.
Where do you see, you said there were some changes happening in the industry. What are these changes that you're seeing?
Gone are the days of the 10-year outsourcing deal. Where clients outsourced everything to one provider. It's all about multi-sourcing, right sourcing, having the appropriate suppliers for each of the services you need. There's obviously an awful lot of offshoring that goes on. So buying services from India, the Philippines, South Africa, Malaysia, and Eastern Europe, so which you would probably call nearshoring rather than offshoring. And each of those geographies has different strengths for different services. So it's about finding the right supplier in the right geography for the services you need, and then managing all of them and integrating those services. There's a service integration and management or SIAM is now becoming more popular in terms of having set processes for managing and integrating those service providers. And I'd say that the key trend here is having the right suppliers for the right services in the right geographies.
So you mentioned a couple of interesting outsourcing words. So outsourcing is a general term, and then you have nearshoring, offshoring. Any other terms that we need to know about?
Yeah, there's a whole glossary, isn't there? I think really, yeah, those are the key terms, aren't they? Nearshoring is I guess sort of Eastern Europe is the most common location for that for us. Offshoring or far shoring, as it is sometimes called, buying in services from the likes of India or maybe China. Just trying to think of what other terms there are. There are outsourcers, there are service providers, there are suppliers. Basically, they're all doing the same thing. Different organizations want to call themselves different things. Most of them want to be a partner. But in my experience, partnership suggests shared risk and shared reward. And very few of the service providers we're talking about are really willing to take on genuine business risk. So I think a little bit of a misnomer there. And I am filibustering in an attempt to think of some of the other obvious terminology, and I'm failing, I'm afraid. So if anything else comes to me, I'll interject with it.
Me too. I think those are the ones that are relevant, and this has been amazing, Jeremy. Guys, if you want to learn how your SME or startup can, make more sales. Sales is paramount in your business. It's so important to have like a sales process nailed down, and it's a really good idea to have somebody externally come in here and actually look at your entire process. So for more information about Jeremy, you can go to Smith & Smith. That's actually smith-n-smith.com. This will also be in the show notes as a link. We'll also put in, that's the link I think we'll add. Is there any other link you want us to share, Jeremy?
I think that's the main one. There's also my LinkedIn profile, which is focused on the IT benchmarking business. So if you could put that in the notes as well, that would be great.
Fantastic. Yeah, we'll also add your LinkedIn profile. And guys, if you have a big company that needs outsource benchmarking within the IT sector, then Jeremy is definitely the man to go to. Thank you so much for being on the show. And
thanks for having me, Alan.
It's been amazing. Guys, if you enjoyed this episode of Hardcore MBA, it is actually very difficult to get reviews, and it does mean the world to me. We are trying to reach a larger audience, and the way you can give back is actually to write a short, honest review on iTunes that'll basically help our ranking, and we'll be able to reach a larger audience. Thank you for listening today. Check out smith-n-smith.com. Jeremy Smith, the outsourcing and sales expert and entrepreneur. Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by MrOutsource.com. Outsourcing to the Philippines done for you. Mr. Outsource is a recruitment company matching busy entrepreneurs with Filipino virtual assistants, so you can have the time to focus on what's important.